Trespassers, a tribute to Benny Rothman and all fighters for the freedom to roam, by Malc Cowle, narrated by the author. For Tom Cowle, his heirs and successors, and in fond memory of Benny Rothman. The day was just ending as I was descending by Grimesbrook, just by Upper Tor, when a voice cried, "Hey you!" in the way keepers do. He'd the worst face that ever I saw. The things that he said were unpleasant. In the teeth of his fury, I said, "Sooner than part from the mountains, I think I would rather be dead." He called me a louse and said, "Think of the grouse." Well, I thought, but I still couldn't see, why old Kinder Scout and the moors round about couldn't take both the poor grouse and me. He said, "All this land is my master's." At that I stood shaking my head. No man has the right to own mountains, any more than the deep ocean bed. From the Manchester Rambler, by Ewan MacColl. Trespassers, originally published as 3 short stories, comprising No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Conigart-Sized Triumph, and The Bicycle Frame Builder's Apprentice. Democratic rights are like public footpaths. Neglect their use and they will be fenced off, ploughed up and built on. When you really need them to protect your liberties and those of others, you will find they have been taken away. Benny Rothman in conversation with Malc Cowle. No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains. A tale of land theft for feral children of all ages. Chapter 1. "Come on, Rosie, it's time for bed." "Oh, Ma'am, I'm not tired." "Never mind you're not tired. You will be in the morning if you don't get your beauty sleep." "But it's Saturday tomorrow. Can't I stay up late?" "No, I've lots to do tomorrow, and I want you up early, young miss." Rosie glanced at her mother. Realizing she'd be wasting her time arguing, she decided to change tack. Maybe some subtle diplomacy could win her more time. "If I get ready straight away, can Grandad tell me a tale?" "Aye, as long as he's happy about it." "Will you, Grandad?" The old man shook his mane of white hair with a chuckle. "Go and lave your face and hands, lass. Put your pyjamas on, and we'll see." Rosie's cheeks dimpled, and with a flashing grin on her impish little face, and a sweep of her long dark brown hair, she was off up the stairs at a fast trot. "Now, Dad, just make sure you don't get her too excited. I really do need her up fresh in the morning. I've all the shopping to do, and Billy and Moira are coming for dinner on Sunday." Lass, you fret too much. What if I take Rosie on a ramble tomorrow?" "A ramble? You haven't been for a walk for ages." "Aye, don't I know it. I'll be in my grave afore long. I reckon I need to start using my legs again afore I lose 'em. Anyway, it's about time Rosie were introduced at great outdoors. Town's no place for a lively lass like her." "Where you thinking of taking her?" "Kinder Scout." "What on earth's put that idea in your head?" "The Manchester Evening News. Your MacColl died t'other day, and nobody bothered to tell me." Rosie was up bright and early the next morning, not least because her grandfather had promised her a treat. Now, after having enjoyed a good breakfast of bacon, eggs and tomatoes, and having donned her outdoor clothes, stout shoes, a woolly pom-pom hat, and having carefully wound her long, soft, gaudily striped scarf around her neck, for her elder mentor had assured her it was cold where they were headed, she was ready, and they were closing the front door behind them. "Where we going, Grandad?" "For bus, lass." "I guessed that, but where we going?" She looked up into her grandfather's smiling bright blue eyes, a paler version of her own, as they walked briskly down the street of red brick terraced houses, holding hands. "We're going where wind blows fresh and curlew cries, a place where I won this stout stick that I used to prop myself up with. Now I'm an old man." "You're not that old, Grandad. Rosie responded, gripping his hand tight. "I can hardly keep up with you." "We can't hang about, lass. There's only a bus once every hour. We mustn't miss it." "But where are we going?" "I've told you. A wild moorland place. One of the largest areas of wild upland country not crossed by a tarmac road left in the whole of England." Before Rosie could ask another question, she was hanging on to her granddad's hand as he began to run. They arrived at the bus stop as the last passenger was scrambling aboard. They followed, but not before the young girl had read the destination board on the bus's front. Grandad paid the fare, confirming their destination, and she was leading him up the stairs to the upper deck and a front seat on the left. "Hayfield? That sounds nice, Grandad." "Aye, it's a lovely village, or at least it were last time I were there." "Tell me how you won the walking stick." "Well, it might be a shock to you, young Rosie, but—" He hesitated. Rosie had the idea he was reluctant to tell her for some strange reason. "Come on, Grandad. You always tell me we mustn't have secrets from each other." "Well, you see, lass, I kinda nicked it." "Nicked it? You mean you stole it?" Rosie sounded shocked. She looked at her beloved grandfather in disbelief. She couldn't imagine him stealing anything. "Yes, I have to admit it, I stole it. But it were in a good cause, Rosie. I took it off a gamekeeper. He was about to hit my darling sweetheart, your poor dead grandmother, across the head with it. It were at Battle of Kinder Scout." "The Battle of Kinder Scout? Was that in the war?" "Aye, lass, but not the war you're thinking of." He shook his head, a gleam in his eye and a smile on his lips. "It were a battle in a war that's gone on almost since beginning of time, and is still going on today, if truth be known. The war against biggest set of rogues humanity has ever produced." "Who are they, Grandad?" "Land thieves, Rosie, my love. They call themselves gentlemen, aristocrats and country landowners here in England, but they operate in other countries under other guises and other names." Land thieves. Rosie was all ears. Grandad was always full of surprises and the best storyteller she'd ever come across. She just wished her English teacher could meet him. She might learn a thing or two, and not just how to keep her pupils' wayward attentions either. The bus wended on its way, leaving Stockport behind. Soon they were passing the rising sun in Hazel Grove, following the sign for Buxton up the busy A6. Rosie remained silent as the road began to climb through the Cheshire countryside, past the occasional cottage and ancient farmhouse. Then they were through the village of High Lane and entering Disley. Increasingly, Cheshire red brick gave way to brownish golden gritstone as the main building material, and barbed wire fences gave way to dry stone walls. "What's a curlew, Grandad?" The old man laughed. "I thought you'd gone to sleep. It's the most wonderful bird in the world, Rosie. At least that's what I think. I've never forgotten the first time I heard its burbling cry, and whenever I've heard it since, I know I'm in right place at right time." "What does it sound like?" "Be patient, Rosie. You'll know soon enough with a little bit of luck. There's a chance there might be at least one curlew in the air when we get to Kinder, assuming they haven't packed up and fled to the coast for winter." He frowned, realising it was probably far too late for curlew, but he didn't enlighten his granddaughter. "Kinder? Do you mean you're taking me to the battlefield?" "Aye, me love, and a wild, lonely and lovely place it be." Rosie glanced out of the window, having left Disley far behind. Slightly below her, running parallel to the road they were travelling on, and cut into the hillside, ran a canal, its banks populated with trees and bushes, most of them bare of leaves, it being the last Saturday in October. The hills across the wide, deep valley were becoming more prominent, and the overall aspect growing wilder. Then they were turning left off the main road, descending steeply past Newtown Station on the right, into the mill town of New Mills. They'd left Cheshire behind, and were now in Derbyshire, Grandad informed her. "Not far now, Rosie. We'll soon be there. Look out for Watson Weasel." The waltzing weasel? What on earth's that? Rosie, you know what a weasel is, don't you? Some kind of wild beast. Yes, a rather small brown and white wild beast. And you know what a waltz is, don't you? It's a dance. Exactly. So when you see a dancing weasel, let me know. Rosie shook her head. Grandad could be exasperating at times. Still, she kept her eyes peeled, constantly scanning the side of the road as they headed uphill out of the town. Suddenly, something higher than the flagged pavement that had momentarily replaced the thin strip of rough grass on the roadside verge attracted her bright eyes' attention. A brightly coloured painted sign, swinging above a door in the breeze. Oh, I might have known. It's a pub. Good lass, Rosie. We're almost there. Come on. Time to get ready to disembark. You don't want to end up back in Stockport. Don't forget your stick, Grandad. There might be a gamekeeper waiting to pounce on you. Ah, but a keeper wouldn't stand a chance, would he, Rosie, my little love? Not with my secret weapon by my side. Secret weapon? She looked up at him quizzically. I mean you daft apeth. One look and you'd charm anyone into submission. Now come on, we've some tramping to do. No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Chapter 2. You were right about wrapping up warm, Grandad. Just wait till we get a bit higher, Rosie. You always need to be prepared for the worst on Kinder, whatever time of year you come. They were walking up the narrow tree-lined lane called, rather inappropriately, Kinder Road, for it was barely wide enough for 2 motor vehicles. They'd just passed the Sportsman pub, where Grandad had promised to treat Rosie to a slap-up meal. On their right was a campsite, empty apart from 2 lone tents side by side, as if huddled together for warmth. The sight of them had triggered the youngster's imagination. Have you got a tent, Grandad? Aye, lass. Why'd you ask? I was just thinking it would be nice to camp up here. It's a bit too cold for that at this time of year, me love. But we could come in the spring, couldn't we? It would be wonderful. We could come up on a Friday night and spend all weekend exploring and having all kinds of adventures. Would you like that, Rosie? Yes, I really would, Grandad. She tightened her grip on the old man's hand momentarily and looked up at him, a mischievous smile on her face. Providing you were with me, I know I'm safe with you, Grandad, and I love your stories. You bring everything to life. He chuckled at the idea, but his old eyes were watering, and it wasn't down to the cold stiff breeze, a southwesterly, and blowing on their backs. He looked up to the towering mass that was the southwest flank of Kinder. His mind went back in time to his own youth, to the time when he too had first discovered the magic of this place, the day he'd met Josie, the girl who was to become his sweetheart, his lover, his wife, and the mother of their 2 children. She'd had the same rich, dark brown hair, almost black, as young Rosie had now, and the same eyes, the sharp, clear blue of a blackbird's eggshell. They seemed to have spent a greater proportion of their leisure time, what little they had, that is, up here and over the other side of Kinder in Edale, than they'd spent back home. Over the years they'd explored the surrounding areas of the Dark Peak, and sometimes the limestone areas of the White Peak. They'd done it on a shoestring budget, because they never had any money in quantity. But who needs money when you have the power of your own legs, a canvas shelter, good sleeping bags, stout boots, and warm clothing, with some of the most inspiring countryside in Britain on your doorstep, and the determination to enjoy it? There are pleasures in life no amounts of money can buy, and all too often such simple delights remain hidden from those with too much wealth. When Bill had been born, and 2 years later Alice, Rosie's mum, they'd had to make adjustments, but not too many. The kids had accompanied them long before they could walk, and they'd thrived as a result. Grandad, Rosie's treble voice broke into his reverie. "Yes, my love." "Is it far to the battleground?" "Not really. It's just up William Clough, but I've something else to show you first." They now left the lower cultivated land behind. The green, close-cropped grass, grazed by the ever-present and ever-bleating sheep, had given way to coarse tussock grass, with patches of heather and ling. The old man stopped in his tracks. "Here, Rosie, let me lift yous up on t' wall." He bent down, placing his gnarled old hands beneath her armpits, and lifted her bodily, swinging her legs over the dry stone wall, and then perching her atop with a grunt as he exhaled breath. She leant back against him, feeling the need for security, as the large stone slab she found herself perched on rocked slightly beneath her. He pointed straight ahead to the eastern end of the mass of greeny-brown hillside, soaring up to the jagged gritstone edge, with its black, rugged wind and rain-sculptured, ice-shattered rocks, silhouetted dark and glowering against the grey October morning sky. "That's Kinder Low End. Kinder Low's the highest point for miles around, 2,077 feet above sea level at its peak," Grandad announced. She gazed in wonder across the wild landscape, conscious of the silence broken only by the brown, peat-stained waters of the fast-rushing, gurgling stream, known as the River Set, which lay immediately below her at this point, and the soft sough of the late autumn wind, with its chilly promise of approaching winter. "Why's it called a low, Grandad, when it's so high up? It doesn't make sense." "I think it's a Norse word, Rosie, meaning a burial place. Some long-forgotten chieftain was probably buried there. Just on t'other side at Low and below it there's an old pack-horse road that connects Hayfield to Edale. There's an old stone cross marking boundary. Edale Cross it's called. That's where I first set eyes on your grandma." "Oh, can we go there?" "Not today, Rosie, we won't have time, but we could go next weekend if your mam'll let us." "I'm sure she will, Grandad. Maybe we can get her to come." "See if you can. She spends too much time in th' house fretting o'er stuff that's of no real importance. It'll do her good. She's been moping about ever since Dad were killed. I'm always trying to cheer her up, Grandad." "I know, love. She's taking it hard, but that's why we need to get her out at th' house. Give her a new perspective on life. She used to love coming up here. Anyway, let's get you off that wall afore you become part of it. We'll soon be where Trespass began." No sooner said than done, with the old man's help to turn herself on the wall without falling into the river below. Rosie was back on terra firma and walking up the lane. The tarmac ran out and the lane became a rough track. Here they turned left into the entrance of an old abandoned quarry, its sheer gritstone walls forming an amphitheatre cut into the hillside. "This is where we started from. See that big rock, Rosie?" He pointed and she nodded. "That's where Benny Rothman made a short speech explaining the route we should take. There are over 400 of us, lads and lasses, from th' engineering and textile towns of Manchester, Salford and Stockport, many of 'em unemployed, with little prospect of work. It were 1932, a lean year among starvation years for working folk. They call 'em th' hungry 30s now. Anyhow, work or no work, we were all united in a common cause, the fight for the freedom to roam, to force our right to at least to be able to enjoy the delights that nature provides free of charge, fresh air and blue sky, wind and rain, instead of the muck, grime and filthy smoke we had to cope with in the towns." Rosie remained quiet, taking in her surroundings, overawed by the mass of moorland sweeping upwards above the quarry. The old man had also gone quiet, his mind travelling back in time to Sunday, April the 24th, almost 58 years before, when he was a mere lad of 19 summers. A pair of chattering jackdaws, high up on the gritstone rock face to their right, interrupted both their thoughts. Aye, Rosie, such a simple demand of freedom to roam. Little did we know the real extent of the forces ranged against us. Come on, lass, let me show you what we were after. She took his hand in hers. I'm glad you brought me, Grandad. It's such a wonderful place. There's lots more yet, lass. They resumed their way up the rutted track to a point where it split in two. Grandad branched left, and they began to climb a large patch of shimmering water, a small lake, on their right-hand side. That's Kinder Reservoir, Rosie, built to provide clean, pure water to people of Stockport way back in 1899 by Stockport Borough Corporation. Took 9 years to build. Manchester Corporation built its first reservoir not too far away from here, in Longdendale Valley, in the 1850s. Ted Heath handed them over to a regional water board in the 1970s, and that she-wolf Thatcher privatised them this year. So we have water thieves to contend with as well as land thieves. Grandad, it's not good to get angry at your age. At least that's what Mum says. Anger's a perfectly natural emotion when injustice takes place, Rosie. Trouble with your mum is she bottles it up. He looked down at the girl and then laughed. I do get a bit excited, don't I, lass? But the fact is, the system stinks. If they could bottle up the very air we breathe, they would, and then they'd force us to buy it off 'em, and that's a fact. They're nowt but thieves and money grubbers. No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Chapter 3. Wow, Grandad, this is getting better and better. Rosie was looking straight ahead and upwards. They'd left the reservoir behind and were climbing up a narrow defile, a steep-sided little valley cut by the fast-running stream rushing down slightly below the narrow footpath. This is William Clough, Rosie. You mean it was named after William Clough? Grandad chuckled. Well, it was certainly named after someone called William, but Clough weren't his name. If my memory serves me right, he were a blacksmith and cutler. A Clough's a mountain stream, although folk often use it to name a steep-sided valley like this. How do you know all this, Grandad? Well, I used to come up here most weekends and every single bank holiday. Your grandma were from Little Hayfield, and she were a real fount of knowledge. You must miss her, Grandad. Aye, I do, lass, but what, Grandad? Well, I've never told you this, but your grandma died same night you were born. So they says, lass, although I was broken-hearted at the time, at least I've got thee to comfort me. He speeded up, leaving Rosie in his wake, as if to prevent her responding, and then they were on a patch of almost level ground. He pointed upwards with his walking stick. There are about 8 men strung along the hillside there, Rosie, all of 'em armed with sticks like this'n. They were gamekeepers, sent by Duke of Devonshire himself to stop us getting up onto the Scout. What happened next, Grandad? Were you frightened? Nay, lass. Thing is, we hadn't taken trouble to come all the way from Manchester to be halted by a few trouble-making gamekeepers. Even if they were the serfs and lackeys of a nobleman, it would have been like going to Blackpool and not seeing th' ocean. Young Benny Rothman blew his whistle and off we set, determined to get onto the top and enjoy Gradley View. We had 'em outnumbered 50 to 1, but silly sods still tried to stop some of us, wielding their sticks like demons. They were a bit of a fight, although not many of us were involved, and only one keeper were hurt. Daft sod tripped up, sprained his ankle and knocked himself out. A lone rambler, who wasn't with us and had stuck to the public footpath, was arrested for it and found guilty, although he had nought to do with it. Most of the women and girls had stayed behind when they sought keepers, but your grandma decided to cleave to me. That's how she almost got her head broke and I got this here stick. It must have been awful, Grandad. It were unnecessary. They should never have tried to stop us. Unluckily for us, the police had more sense than keepers. What do you mean, Grandad? First thing first, young Rosie, I'll tell you in due course. Now, see that knobbly bit left up yonder? He pointed upwards with his stick once more. That's Ashurped. That's where we got up to, and that's where Benny Rothman made another speech congratulating us on our success. And then, after contemplating the view and hugging each other, and meeting some lads that had come over from Sheffield via Edale, and singing the Red Flag and the Communist International, we came back down, feeling as though we'd been on top of the world, and overjoyed it had all been so easy. I wish I'd been there. It sounds so exciting, Grandad. It were, lass, but it were more than that. Because of what happened after that, it changed the course of British history. And for once it were changed for the better. And it was all down to a few hundred working-class lads and lasses, or'nary common folk, just like thee and me. Not like you, Grandad. You were one of the heroes. Now, can we get to the top? I don't think we should, Rosie. Look over there. Them black clouds mean rain, and Kinder's not the place to be in a storm. Let's get back to pub, and some warm grub before they stop serving meals. I promise I'll take you up there soon. Maybe in the winter when the ground's hard with frost. What about Christmas, Grandad? That would be the best present ever. Christmas? It's not even November yet, Rosie. Anyway, come on. I'll race you to the bottom. Grandad! Rosie was going to say he shouldn't be running at his age, but he was already off, waving his walking stick in the air, as if he'd been possessed by the demonic gamekeeper he'd nicked it off. She began to run after him, but he didn't get far. Down he went in the tussock grass by the side of the path, and when she reached him he was holding his ankle, in obvious pain. Grandad, what have you done now? I wish you could be sensible for once in a while. He looked up at her ruefully. You're beginning to sound like your mother, and you're never a scrap of a lass, not yet 12. In fact, you're beginning to sound like my mother. Never mind that, Grandad. What have you done? Does it hurt? I've twisted my ankle. I went down that hole. I'd better go and get help. Let me get me breath back. I'm sure I'll be able to walk. Unfortunately, when he tried, he soon sat back down again. Rosie decided he needed help, no matter how much he pretended otherwise. Storm clouds were gathering, and the wind was getting up. This time she started downhill, only stopping to shout over her shoulder, I'll be back with the first person I find. Don't you dare run away. Despite telling Grandad he shouldn't run, Rosie ignored her own advice and sped downhill like a young gazelle. Just past the reservoir, she spotted a lad sat on the dry stone wall, laughing at a terrier stood on its hind legs and jumping up as if attempting to join him on his perch. Help, she called. Please help me. He looked up and scrambled down as she approached. What's matter? My grandfather's twisted his ankle. He can't walk. Towny, is he? He asked, somewhat scornfully. She ignored him. Please help us. Don't worry, lass. How far away is he? Just above William Clough. She was already turning back, the dog yelping at her heels. The lad soon caught up. Don't panic, lass. He won't come to any harm. The weather's turning. I don't want him getting drenched. He's an old man. We'll soon have him safe and sound. Where you from? Levensham in Manchester, but we live in Stockport now. Grandad was married to a woman from Little Hayfield. Oh, aye? What were her name? Josie. No, I mean a second name afore she were wed. I've no idea. What does it matter? It's Grandad that's in trouble. There's no need to get ratty. Is that him backside that path? Yes. Grandad, Grandad. He looked up, a grin on his face, waving his stick. Are you all right, Grandad? Yes, I'm fine, Rosie. I've just been contemplating view. Can you use that stick to begin to lift yourself a little? The lad interrupted. Then I can get my arm under you. Once you're upright, you can lean on my shoulder. Between your stick and me as a crutch, we'll soon have you in a sportsman." "Yeah, I reckon I can do that. Thanks for your help, son." "Least I can do. That's it. Now, let me get... Right, now lean on me. I can take your weight, no fear." "I'm all right, as long as I don't put weight on my foot." "OK, let's be off before it starts raining." Rosie was about to add, "up to it," but something told her not to. "What would you like to drink, Grandad?" The old man looked up from the menu he was perusing. "Whose beer is it, love?" "Thwaite's." "Then I'll have a pint of best bitter. What are you having, lad?" "I'd have same, but my dad might come in. I'm only 15. He won't be best pleased, and I'm already in enough trouble. I best stick to lemonade." Rosie left them while she placed the order. "Are you comfortable? We should get a doctor to see that ankle, mister. O'Donnell, Jack O'Donnell. What's your name, lad?" "Gartside, Ralph Gartside." "Do you live in Hayfield?" "No, me dad has a farm about a mile from here." "Well, Ralph, that's a name I won't forget in a hurry. Thanks for all your help. I'm really grateful. I'm sure our Rosie is too." "She's a spirited young lass. She had me under orders from the word go." "Aye, our Rosie is a bit special. She's... Here you are, Grandad. Now, what are we going to have to eat?" Rosie placed the tray of drinks on the tabletop and then bent down to fondle the terrier that had followed her to and from the bar. "What's your name, little one?" she asked, fondling his ears as the dog looked up to her with its dark brown liquid eyes. "He's called Titch, Rosie," Ralph responded. "He were the run to the litter." "He's a lovely dog. I've always liked black and tan." Titch wagged his tail as if he understood every word. "He seems to have taken to you, Rosie. Perhaps he recognises a fellow Manchester terrier." "What's your name?" she asked. Before he had chance to answer, a noisy group of men in working clothes appeared through the pub entrance. One of them, a dark-haired, sullen-looking man, spotted the young lad. "What are you doing in here, Ralph? Not cadging off tourists, I hope. It's about time you were off home." All three looked across in surprise, but Rosie was the first to break the silence. "I don't know who you are, but I'd have you know Ralph's rescued my grandad from halfway up Kinder." "Well, young miss, I'm the lad's feyther, and I'll thank thee to keep thy nose out of my business." "Mr. Gartside," the old man intervened, "I don't want to come between father and son, but your Ralph has done me a great service, and I've already invited him to dine with us. I trust you won't rob an old man of the pleasure of returning a kindness." "Never mind a kind." He got no further. One of his younger companions took him firmly by the shoulder. "Come and sit thyself down, you silly old so-and-so. You're forever showing us up, feyther." He dragged the scowling parent into a side room, giving a wink over his shoulder to his younger brother as he did so. "I'm so sorry," Ralph started to say, but Grandad cut him short. "You've nowt to apologise for, lad. We can't choose our relatives, but we can choose our friends, and you've been a friend to me and Rosie." Rosie smiled and looked across at her new friend rather shyly. Titch thumped his tail. Grandad passed the menu over. "Now, Ralph, what do you recommend we order?" No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Chapter 4. Now that's what I call a meal. It's filled the gap in my stomach up nicely. How's your ankle, Mr. O'Donnell? I'm not going to be able to get my boot back on. It's swollen up like a balloon. Anyhow, lad, I'll survive. But let's have a bit less of the mister. My name's Jack to me friends. But how you going to get back home? Is there a taxi service? Aye, Old Ellie's Broadbottom. Shall I ring him for you? It would be helpful. He glanced at the clock. It was coming up to 3. Ask him if he can pick us up about 6:30. I'm comfortable here, and maybe Rosie would like to have a look round village." Rosie looked up, still fondling Titch's ears. "I'm fine, Grandad. I need to keep you out of trouble. Anyway, you haven't finished telling me about the trespass. Who's Benny Rothman, and how does the Duke of Thingamabob come into it?" "Devonshire, Rosie, the Duke of Devonshire. He owns most of the land hereabouts, and the way he got it is an interesting tale in itself." "Well, go on, Grandad. We've only got 3.5 hours. Patience is a virtue, Rosie, my love. Now, to cut a long story short, we have to go back to 1066. 1066? What's that got to do with anything?" The old man chuckled. "That were the year England began to really become a nation. William of Normandy, the descendant of Norsemen who'd settled in part of what is now France, invaded our island and defeated Harold Godwin, who claimed to be the lawful king. William changed the pattern of land ownership forever. He took all the land into his own hands, and then parcelled bits of it out to all the barons who'd helped him defeat Harold, and to the Saxon earls who collaborated with him. He introduced the feudal system, and that's how England's system of private land ownership began. William was the land thief in chief. He took the lot and gave it out to his favourite lackeys and Saxon traitors." "Oh, so that's how the Duke of Thingamabob ended up owning Kinder?" "No, at least not directly." Rosie frowned. "William kept a lot of the land out of private ownership. It was known as King's Land, or Waste, or Forest, or Common Land, depending on the part of the country it was in, or the use it was to be put to. Some of it was reserved for hunting and the keeping of game. On some of it, people had the right to graze cattle, horses, or sheep. In other parts, people had the right to dig turf for their fires, to collect firewood, or to allow their pigs to forage for acorns. Most upland country, like Kinder, was King's Land, and so it remained for 700 years, until the 18th century. What happened then? The Enclosure Acts, Rosie. Kinder were one of the prime examples, although it was rather late being enclosed." "Why was it a prime example?" "It were enclosed after 1830. Up to that point, no individual owned it. It's wild land up there, Rosie. Over 2,000 acres of it, mainly blanket bog, fit for nothing agricultural but sheep grazing. Before it were enclosed, people had the right to traverse it at will. There were innumerable tracks and old drove roads, some of them going back to Roman times. Over 40 acres in 2 areas, one known as Poor Man's Peace and the other as Poor Man's Wood, were reserved for the use of the poor of Hayfield. Other hamlets and settlements dotted around Kinder had similar allotments. But from 1830 on, all that changed. The land was surveyed and portions of it parcelled out to landowners in the surrounding area. And what they did was to allot the biggest portions to the largest landowners. In other words, to the rich according to their riches, 2,000 acres were parcelled out, and to the poor, according to their poverty, no land was given, and the 40 acres they already had allocated for their use was taken away. You will find no mention of Poor Man's Peace or Poor Man's Wood on any modern map. That's not fair. There's nothing fair in a country like ours, run by rogues and villains, Rosie, except the weather, and that's only fair sometimes. Anyhow, I'm sure if you spoke to the local vicar, he'd tell you it were all in line with the Bible's teachings. How can it be? The old man chuckled, picked up a paper napkin, folded it, and tucked it under his shirt collar, like a clerical dog collar. Then, in a deep voice, he stated gravely, "For whosoever hath, to him shall be given, and he shall have more abundance. But whosoever hath not, from him shall be taken away even that fact he hath. Matthew, chapter 13, verse 12, the King James Version of the Bible, approved by both church and state. He looked across the table at his granddaughter once more. So, you see, young Rosie, because the Duke of Devonshire were the biggest landowner in the area, he got most akin to Scout. Mind you, there were another Christian cleric way back in the 14th century, John Ball by name, a follower of St. Francis, a friar, who was one of the leaders of the landless English peasants in what was known as the Peasants' Revolt. He challenged the established church and the landed gentry, using the teachings of the Bible as his weapon. He asked the question, when Adam delved and Eve span, who then was the gentleman? He argued that God had given the land to Adam and Eve and all their successors, not to a few noblemen. Ralph laughed. You and my old man have something in common at least. The two of yous would get on like house on fire, Mr. O'Donnell. He's not so fond at Devonshire's. Why not, lad? He's a tenant farmer and they're his landlord. No wonder he's such a bad-tempered old so-and-so. Ralph laughed again. He's not that bad. His bark's worse than his bite. Like most hill farmers, he's going through a bad time. New Zealand lamb's dirt cheap and there's no call for wool. My mother's wanting to start doing bed and breakfast, but the old man's dead against it. He says she'll be demeaning herself. He shook his head. He's a proud old so-and-so, but me and my brothers are working on him. Mum's quite right. We have to live, and the farm doesn't provide enough income. But what's so important about the land if it's not fit for anything but sheep? Rosie intervened. Why did the Duke of Thingymabob stop people walking over it? Grouse, Ralph responded. Grouse? Yes, they're a game bird, Rosie, and every year on the glorious 12th the Duke and his cronies go up onto the moors to shoot 'em. You mean that's why my grandma was... Rosie got no further. She was interrupted in full flow by the sudden appearance of Ralph's father, accompanied by two younger men. Are you all right, Tower, Ralph? Aye, of course I am. What's the... Come on, feyther, one of the others interjected. The older man shuffled his feet. I reckon I owe thy friends an apology, he finally said, looking very uncomfortable. Especially you, young miss. I'm sorry for my bad behaviour earlier. Rosie smiled her sweetest smile. Grandad laughed. No offence were taken, Mr. Gartside. Would you like a drink? That's very handsome of thee. Feyther, we've cows to milk. Young Ralph put in his 2 penn'orth. Sit down, feyther. I'll do your chores. This is Mr. O'Donnell and his granddaughter, Rosie. This is me feyther, Jed, Mr. O'Donnell. Grandad leant across the table, holding his hand out. My name's Jack. I'm sorry I can't stand to shake your hand. I'm non-walking wounded. Here now, Rosie, take this to bar. I'll have bitter. You get yourself whatever you want. What about you, Jed? I'll have same. It's very good of you. Your son tells me you're not a fan at Devonshire's. Our Ralph's good at understatement. I'll leave you to it, feyther. Will you and Rosie be coming up again, Mr. O'Donnell? Not if you don't start calling me Jack. He paused for a moment. I promised to take Rosie up to Edale Cross next weekend, but I don't know if I can manage it with this uncle, and I hate the idea of disappointing her. She could stay with us, couldn't she, feyther? She can have Sissy's room. I can show her round and she'd be company for our Connie.
No man has a right to own mountains. Chapter 5.
No, Rosie, and that's final. Oh, ma'am, that's just not fair. There's nothing fair in this, except for the weather, I know, but you're not a tyrant or a land thief. You're my lovely ma'am, and you, of all people, should be fair. Grandad promised to take me, and now he can't, and now... That's quite enough, young miss. I'm not having you traipsing off on your own to stay with strangers. You're only 11, for goodness sake." Rosie couldn't believe her ears. She flounced out of the kitchen in a rage, ignoring her grandfather, who buried his head in the newspaper, desperately thinking how he could act as a go-between, and not sure his diplomatic skills would be anywhere near adequate. He listened as Rosie stomped up the stairs. Then she started coming down again, and her head popped around the door. "Grandad, tell Mam I'm going on hunger strike, and I might even run away in the night when you're both asleep." "You should never run away on an empty stomach, Rosie. I tried it once, and it's not a good idea, believe you me." Next minute she was on the sofa next to him, fighting back her tears. "It's just not fair, Grandad. Mam's just an old meanie." He put his arms around her, and within seconds she buried her head in his chest, sobbing her heart out. "Come on, Rosie. It's not the end of the world. Anyway, maybe me uncle'll get better by next week. You never know." Eventually she regained control. "Does it hurt bad, Grandad?" "Not really," he lied. "We had a lovely day, apart from that, and we made some new friends because of it. I think Ralph's ever so nice, and Titch is a lovely dog. Even Mr. Gartside ended up being very kind." "He did, didn't he? A bit of a surprise, that. I'm glad you enjoyed your day, love, and we'll soon be able to get back. You shouldn't blame your mum. She only worries because she loves you. She's only trying to protect you." She's a wicked old witch sometimes." "Rosie, don't say that." "Well, she is. It took me ages to convince her I could get the bus to school on my own, and if I can get the bus to school, why can't I get the bus to Hayfield? Ralph said he'd meet me at the bus stop. She just doesn't understand me." He gave her shoulder a squeeze. "Don't be too hard on, but why can't she be like you, Grandad? You always understand me, and you care about me just as much as Mum." Meanwhile, Alice, despite being busy in the kitchen, could hear every word, and her ears were burning. She decided to intervene. "Rosie, before you say anything, Alice, I've had an idea." She looked at her father, a frown creasing her troubled brow. "What is it? I hope it's not another harebrained scheme." "Why don't you take a bit of time off and relax? You need a break more than any of us. You could take Rosie up there and meet the Gartsides. If you're not happy with them, you can bring Rosie back. If you are, you can let her stay the weekend, and, if you agree, I'll pay for you to stay at the Sportsman. You must remember it. It's a lovely pub and they do great food." Rosie's eyes opened wide in delight. "Good old Grandad. Get out of that one, Mum. Dad, I've things to do. I can't just drop everything, and how's an old cripple like you to manage without me?" "Less of the old, Alice. As for being a cripple, I'll get a crutch, and anyway, by next Friday I'll no doubt be able to hobble about." "Yes, go on, Grandad. Don't let her off the hook." "Well, I'll think about it, but I'm not promising anything." She returned to her food preparation. Rosie turned to Grandad and put her arm round his neck, hugged him tight and kissed him on the cheek. "Brilliant. You did it. I knew you would. Mam's going to take me. I'll bet you anything you like. Tomorrow tea time she'll tell us." Grandad chuckled. "Don't cross your bridges before—" She will, bet you anything." The old man picked up his paper once more. "You never told me about Benny Rothman, or what you meant about the cops being cleverer than the gamekeepers." "I never did I? No, and I can't wait to find out. Food's almost ready. Can you set the table for me, please, Rosie?" "Looks as though you'll have to wait, love," Grandad said with a grin. "I'd help you, but—" "Come in, Ma'am." He opened his newspaper once more, as Rosie disappeared into the kitchen for the knives and forks, a big smile illuminating her face. "Lass, you've done us proud." "Yes, that was lovely, Ma'am. You make the best steak and kidney pie in the world. Can I clear the table and wash up for you?" Alice looked at her daughter and frowned. Rosie tended to be helpful, but this was a bit over the top. "No, we'll do it together. But I could murder a cup of tea, and I bet Grandad could as well." "I'll make it, ma'am." And off she was like a shot. Alice caught her father's twinkling eye. "Why the bus? Last time I went to Hayfield it were by train." "That dates you, lass. The line to Hayfield finally closed in 1970, thanks to that stupid old so-and-so beaching. Now we've got lorries and cars blocking up A6, bonnet to boot, burning petrol and diesel as if it were going out of fashion, spilling out their poisonous fumes and slowing all buses up. You mark me words, we'll be crying out for railways soon, and trams for that matter. You can't keep living in the past, Dad. It's progress." "Progress? You've got to be joking, Alice. Progress means going forwards, not backwards. They'll be privatising them next, and that means another land grab." "What on earth are you talking about now? What's a land grab got to do with it?" "British Rail don't just own track and rolling stock. It owns vast acres of land, station yards, old goods yards, all the land along the edge of the railway. Beautiful country stations, magnificent and highly profitable hotels, like the North Euston in Fleetwood and the Midland in Manchester. There'll be land speculators falling over themselves to get it at a knockdown price." He returned to his paper. "Well, there's not much we can do about it." The paper went down. "Isn't there? We could use our democratic rights and ensure Thatcher don't get back in, and we could occupy any land they tried to sell off, if worse comes to worse, and we could—" "Dad, calm down." "Well, I can't help believing folks should stand up on their hind legs. We shouldn't allow our sense to be robbed left, right and centre, so-and-so land thieves." He turned back to his paper, then had second thoughts. "And I'll tell you something else. Any government that says governments aren't fit to run public services and companies ain't fit to govern out. If they can't organise the running of a railway, what right have they to say they're fit to run a country? Answer me that. They'll have us disposing of our own sewage soon and burying our own refuse and digging well for water. There's not room for a cesspit in the backyard, Dad. Pity. I was thinking of inviting Thatcher for tea."
No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains, Chapter 6.
"Thanks, Mum. It's no use thanking me. It's Grandad's daft idea." "Don't be like that, Mum. You're going to love it. Just wait till you meet Titch and Ralph." I must admit he sounded very nice on the phone." "You spoke to Titch?" "No, Ralph, you daft apeth." Rosie grinned. They were sat on the upper deck of the bus, stuck in the traffic on the A6 between Disley and New Mills. The date was Friday the 3rd of November, 1989. It was now gone 5 o'clock, and the sun had set a good half hour before. "We might have been better leaving it until tomorrow, Rosie. We're not going to see anything tonight." "But we'll be able to get up and be out as soon as it's light, Mum. We'll have 2 full days to enjoy ourselves. Will you take me to Edale Cross?" "Yes, of course. But why there in particular?" "Grandad told me that's where he first met Grandma." "That's right. And guess what, Rosie?" "What, Mum?" "She'd tripped when she was running and sprained her ankle." "You mean it runs in the family?" "Hopefully not. I haven't done it yet." "What was she like?" "Oh, Rosie, Mum was so beautiful. She was a lovely, kind, gentle, unflappable, patient woman. Mind you, she had to be having to cope with Dad. Your Grandad's always been the same, up to some kind of mischief or other, although there's not a bit of harm in him. They were both wonderful parents. Me and your Uncle Billy couldn't have wished for better." "Did you spend much time in Hayfield?"
Little Hayfield, with Mum's mother. She were another wonderful person, though her husband was a different kettle of fish. He'd ale as well. In fact, we walked for miles all around the area. Mantor, Castleton, Winnett's Pass, Ladybower, Bleaklow, you name it, we tramped over it. Why didn't Grandad move to Little Hayfield when they got married? It's far nicer in the country. I suppose it was his job, Rosie. Grandma was a cotton spinner at a mill in New Mills, but she was laid off in the Depression. Grandad was an apprentice toolmaker in Higher Openshaw when he first met her, and was lucky to escape the dole. Toolmakers are the highest skilled manual workers in the engineering industry. He's been very lucky. He's never been out of work in all his life. It was natural for your grandma to go and live with him when they married. There was no work for toolmakers where she lived. I wish I'd been able to meet Grandma, but I love Grandad. He is very special, isn't he, Rosie? He was brilliant when I was a child, and he's been my rock in the last few years. She looked out of the window, peering into the gloom, as if trying to work out where they were. Do you know something, Rosie? He would never, under any circumstances, work overtime, although he would have been paid a lot extra if he had. He was often asked to do so. In fact, he was threatened with a sack more than once for refusing to do so. But he stuck to his guns and wouldn't do it. Why not? Because he said every hour at work was one less hour with Mum, me and Billy, and every hour of overtime work kept somebody else out of work. He said that was wrong and he wouldn't have any part of it. He'd seen too many workers suffer in the 30s, and he'd seen the look of hopelessness in all too many men's eyes when they were made redundant and told they had no future. Skilled, hard-working family men thrown on the scrap heap and an uncertain future. One of his mates took his own life because of it, and that affected your Grandad badly. That's one of the reasons why we had such a wonderful childhood. Dad took us walking and camping at every opportunity he could. He didn't just want to spend time with us. He wanted us to run wild and learn about the world we lived in, and not mope around the house or be stuck in a dirty town. That's why I'm really pleased he started taking you walking. Rosie smiled. Her mother sounded quite enthusiastic. I'm glad you think kids should spend as much time in the country as possible, Ma'am. I'm really looking forward to running wild. All those weekends and bank holidays to come, not to mention school holidays. You might have to stand in for Grandad for weeks, months even. You never know. It might be ages before he can walk properly. The doctor said old people take longer to heal, and Grandad mustn't rush the healing process, didn't he? Alice looked into her daughter's eyes, a look of something like consternation on her own face. Rosie, come on, Ma'am, we're almost there. Ralph will be waiting. Don't forget your backpack. She grabbed her own rucksack and was already heading for the stairs before her mother had a chance to respond. Rosie was the first off the bus, and Alice wasn't too far behind. As promised, Ralph was waiting for them, and he had Titch with him. After the initial introductions, they began to make their way through the dark, narrow streets, lights shining dully through curtains, their boots echoing on the cobbles. Somewhere a dog barked. Titch's head went up, ears erect and alert, but he remained silent. Ralph informed them that his mother had prepared a room for Alice as well as Rosie. But Dad's arranged for me to stay at the Sportsman. That was before my mother decided to sort the other room out. Didn't Mr. O'Donnell tell you? Alice frowned. No, he didn't. Rosie smiled her quiet smile. Well, I spoke to him at lunchtime, and he said he'd cancel the booking. You see, Mother wants to prove to Fayther she can make a go of providing bed and breakfast for tourists. You and Rosie are a kind of experiment, although Fayther don't know it. Well, it's very kind of your mother, but if she's conducting an experiment, we'd better pay. She can have the money I was going to pay the sportsman. No, you won't. Mother won't accept it. In that case, I'll stay at the pub. If your mother's going to make a go at bed and breakfast, she's going to have to charge, and she might as well start straight away. That's the only way she'll conduct a successful experiment. My mother can be very strong-willed. I don't think she'll accept. My mum's very stubborn too, Rosie informed him. I think we are in for an interesting weekend. What do you think, Titch? Titch wagged his tail vigorously. They started up the Kinder Road, eventually reaching the sportsman. Ralph rooted in his pockets, left hand first, and handed a torch to Alice, whilst he delved into his right-hand pocket. You'll need that, Mrs. O'Donnell, and I've got one for you, Rosie. There's no lights where we're heading, and there's too much cloud for the moon to be of much use. Thanks, Ralph, but O'Donnell's my maiden name. Both Rosie and me are called Ackroyd. I'm sorry, I never thought. Why should you? It's a natural mistake. How far is the farm, Ralph? Not far, Rosie. Once we pass the campsite, Edale Road goes off to the right. The farm's just through Colwell Clough. That's the beginning of the old packhorse route to Edale, isn't it? Alice asked. Yes, do you know it? I certainly do. I've walked it to Edale many a time. You're lucky, Rosie. It's the way to Edale Cross. I'll take you tomorrow, and if you can walk that far, we'll go to the Nag's Head in Edale itself for something to eat. She turned to Ralph. Do they still have the children's bar at the back of the pub? Yes, and the old-fashioned penny slot machines. I used to love them when I were a kid. Oh, my Rosie, it's all coming back to me. What fun we had when we used to come up here. Wait till you see Jacob's Ladder and Mam Tor, and, oh, there's such a lot to see and explore. You're going to love it. Rosie smiled quietly to herself, but didn't say a word. She didn't have to. All was going to plan, precisely as she told Grandad it would do. The only problem being that he wasn't there to enjoy it. No Man Has a Right to Own Mountains. Chapter 7. Wakey, wakey, Mum. Here's a cup of tea. Rosie, what time is it? 7:30, Mum. Breakfast will be ready when you've had that and get dressed. Did you have a good night's sleep? I think so. I think I want to go back to sleep. Come on with things to see and things to do. We can't let the day go to waste. Alice struggled upright, wiping the sleep from her eyes. You're pinching my lines, Rosie. What on earth's got into you? I've been up for ages. I've been helping Ralph milk the cows, and I collected the eggs for breakfast, and I'm helping Mrs. Gartside prepare it. And with that she was off, down the old uneven staircase, leaving her mother to enjoy her tea and struggle to face up to a new day in strange surroundings. As Rosie entered the kitchen, Mrs. Gartside smiled. What shall I do next? Rosie asked. The farmer's wife shook her head. I've everything under control here, love. Why don't you relax? Take Titch outside if you want. He seems to have taken to you. I'll give you a shout when I'm ready to serve breakfast. Titch was sprawled out on the multicoloured flock mat in front of the roaring coal fire. He looked across, ears pricked on hearing his name. Does he need a lead? No, love. Titch is well trained. Rosie squatted down. Here, boy. Titch responded, tail wagging. Rosie fondled his ears. Take me for a walk, Titch. There's a good dog. The tail wagged faster. Mrs. Gartside laughed. I'd swear he understands every word, Rosie. Don't forget to wrap up warm. It's pretty cold out there. Stay in the yard and don't go into the buildings alone. Farms are dangerous places. I'll shout you when breakfast's ready. Don't wander off. No sooner said than done. Rosie shut the door behind her and gazed around the farmyard for a moment. The back of the farmhouse faced straight onto the moor. A couple of fields, gently sloping uphill, were bounded by dry stone walls, immediately behind which the hill swept steeply upwards, the course of a stream marked by a line of trees, a distinct tracery of gnarled, twisted black trunks and leafless branches against the otherwise dark mixture of rough grasses, bracken, and small clumps of stunted heather. In one of the fields 6 cows grazed. In the other, sheep cropped the grass, their chorus of bleats blending with the soft sough of the wind and the sound of running water. To the left stood a tall stone barn, forming a right angle with the farmhouse and acting as a windbreak from the westerly winds, which swept in from the Irish Sea across the Cheshire and Lancashire plains, Kinder being the first major landmass in their moisture-laden path. To the right, a low stone building containing the cattle byre and a couple of old stables completed a U-shape, enclosing the cobbled farmyard on 3 sides. An old tractor, rusting away, stood in the far left corner. It caught Rosie's eye. She walked over to it and clambered up onto the cold steel seat, shaped as if moulded by a human backside, albeit one much larger than hers, and mounted on a long curved spring. This, to Rosie's surprise and delight, gave under her weight before springing upwards once more. A seesaw designed for one. She bounced up and down, gripping its sides, whilst Titch stood on his hind legs, his forepaws on the tractor's massive driveshaft cover, his alert eyes concentrating on his new friend, watching her every move. Rosie gazed around, taking in her immediate surroundings. More farm implements, an old plough and a harrow, lay next the wall, slowly oxidizing a rich red-brown amongst a profusion of nettles. Once more her attention was drawn upwards to the jagged gritstone edge high above, and the overcast sky, the colour and texture of her old grey duffel coat, reserved for wearing to school on cold winter days. A crunch of feet on loose stones. Ralph and his father appeared around the end of the cow byre, obviously deep in conversation and unaware of her presence. At the same time, her mother appeared at the farmhouse door, the top half of which she'd opened. "Breakfast, Rosie?" The youngster jumped off the tractor, attracting the attention of the farmer and his son. "Good morning, lass," Mr. Gartside greeted her with a smile. "Morning, Mr. Gartside. Ralph, breakfast ready?" "Aye, and my belly were already telling me." "What are your plans for the day, Rosie?" Ralph asked. "Are you still going to Edale?" "I think so." "Ralph had better go with thee, I reckon," the farmer responded. "Feyther, you were just telling me." "That were then, this is now. I quite forgot about young Rosie and her mother. You can be their guide. Weather's so unpredictable at this time of year." Ralph shook his head, thinking the weather was far more predictable than his father, but didn't argue. Rosie smiled her sweet smile. She was fast developing a soft spot for old Mr. Gartside. They made their way to the kitchen cum dining room. Mr. Gartside immediately went to the black-leaded cast-iron fireplace, squatting down to give the burning coals a poke before warming his hands. Ralph headed to the door that led to the stairs. "I'll get our Connie. Is she awake, mother?" "Yes, and dressed. She's playing with her crayons." Mrs. Gartside turned to Rosie. "Sit this helm down, lass, and you too, Alice. Do you like porridge or cornflakes?" "Both, but can I have porridge, please?" "I'll have the same as Rosie, but please let me help, Elsie," Alice responded. "No, too many cooks spoil. Anyway, you're my guest, so sit down, please." Mr. Gartside joined them, whilst Mrs. Gartside placed bowls of porridge and a fresh jug of milk before them. Moments later, Ralph re-entered the room, a young girl with long hair, the colour of carrots, wearing a long dress and a face full of smiles, held in his arms. "This is my sister Connie," he announced to nobody in particular, although his eyes were on Rosie. Mrs. Gartside grabbed an old wooden chair with a curved spindle back and armrest, placing it at the table opposite Rosie. "Sit her here, Ralph. Would you like porridge, Connie, love?"
please."
Ralph carefully seated her in the chair as his mother placed a bowl of steaming porridge in front of the girl. He took the vacant seat next to her. She picked up her spoon, but then looked up, her eyes wide and an unusual shade of green, gazing straight into Rosie's own, as if trying to access the very depths of the other girl's soul.
"Hello," she suddenly said, breaking the momentary silence. "Do you like reading?"
Rosie, caught off balance by the unexpected question, hesitated before informing her that she did. "Will you read to me at bedtime tonight? Ralph's bought me a new boot."
"Yes, of course I will."
Connie smiled and began to attack her breakfast. "Would you like to walk Tweedale Cross with us?" Rosie asked. Connie shook her head.
"I can't," she said. "I can't walk anywhere, not until I get my new leg."
She smiled once more and returned her attention to her food.